I always thought family meant loyalty, but life had other lessons in store for me. My engagement night was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life. Mark and I had been together for 6 years, and our relationship felt unshakable. Or so I thought. My dad and stepmom hosted a lavish engagement party at their house, the kind of event you'd see on Instagram. Twinkling string lights wrapped around the backyard trees, champagne flowed freely, and everyone was dressed to the nines. Lauren, my stepsister, was her usual self, chatty, charming, and overly touchy with Mark. She had always been the life of the party, effortlessly drawing people into her orbit. I brushed it off like I always did, telling myself she was just flirty by nature. I'd seen her pull the same act with countless men over the years. Besides, Mark was my fiancé. I thought we were solid. The evening went on like a dream at first. Friends and family toasted to our love, their glasses raised high under the warm glow of the garden lanterns. Mark gave a speech that made me tear up, promising to love me forever and declaring that I was his home. In hindsight, the irony of those words is almost unbearable. As the night progressed, I noticed Lauren was drinking more than usual. She kept finding excuses to linger near Mark, laughing too hard at his jokes and touching his arm whenever she spoke to him. At one point, she leaned in so close to whisper something in his ear that I felt a twinge of discomfort. But I pushed it aside. This was my night, and I wasn't going to let her antics ruin it. The truth came out around midnight when the cake was brought out. Everyone gathered around the table, cheering for us to cut it. But Mark was nowhere to be found. I slipped away to look for him, my heels clicking against the polished hardwood floors of my dad's house. The guest rooms upstairs were quiet, the kind of eerie silence that feels out of place during a party. That's when I heard it, a muffled giggle, followed by the unmistakable sound of hushed voices. My stomach dropped as I crept toward the partially open door at the end of the hall. I didn't want to believe it, but some instinct I couldn't ignore forced me forward. And there they were, Mark and Lauren, half-dressed and tangled in the sheets like a scene from a trashy soap opera. The air left my lungs. For a second, I thought I might actually pass out. I must have made a noise because they both turned to see me standing in the doorway. Lauren didn't even bother to cover herself. Her expression was almost smug, like she was daring me to react. "I'm sorry you had to find out like this," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. Mark didn't say a word. He just sat there, pale and pathetic, his shirt halfway unbuttoned and his face a mask of guilt. My hands were trembling so hard I had to clutch the doorframe to steady myself. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just turned on my heel and walked away, my heels echoing in the silent hallway as I headed back downstairs. My entire body felt numb, like I was floating outside myself. When I stormed into the party, people immediately noticed something was wrong. My dad approached me, concern etched on his face. For a split second, I thought he'd take my side. I thought he'd march upstairs, drag Lauren out of the house, and throw Mark into the street. But when I told him what I'd seen, his reaction left me more shattered than the betrayal itself. "You need to calm down," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "Think about the bigger picture here." "The bigger picture?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I just caught my fiancé in bed with Lauren, and you're telling me to calm down?" My stepmom chimed in, her voice sickeningly soothing. "Honey, I know this is hard, but maybe this is for the best. If they're meant to be together, you can't stand in the way of true love." "True love?" My vision blurred with rage. "True love," I shouted. "Is that what we're calling betrayal now?" The rest of the guests were awkwardly avoiding eye contact, murmuring amongst themselves, but not daring to intervene. My dad sighed heavily, like I was the one causing the scene. "These things happen," he said, as if infidelity was just some minor inconvenience. It hit me then like a punch to the gut that I didn't have a family. Not really. They weren't on my side. They never had been. Lauren had always been their golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I was just there. I grabbed my purse and left without another word. Mark was still upstairs when I walked out the door, and I didn't care. Let them have each other. They deserved the mess they were about to create. As I drove away, tears blurred my vision, but I kept going. I knew there was no coming back from this. The life I thought I had, the fiancé, the family, the future, it was all gone in an instant. And the worst part? I knew deep down that none of them would ever truly understand what they'd done to me. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my tiny apartment, still wearing the dress I'd picked out for what should have been one of the happiest nights of my life. My engagement ring sat on the counter, where I'd thrown it as soon as I got home. Its sparkle mocked me under the dim kitchen light. I wanted to smash it with a hammer, but even that felt like too much effort. I just stared at it, letting the weight of everything sink in. The next morning, numb and hollow, I packed up what little courage I had left and started the process of erasing Mark from my life. I called him once, not because I wanted to hear his excuses, but because I wanted clarity. He answered on the second ring, his voice hoarse, like he'd been up all night too. "Hey," he said softly, as if this was just a normal conversation. "I want my stuff," I said flatly, cutting him off before he could say more. "And then I never want to hear from you again." He sighed deeply, but he didn't argue. "I'll drop it off," he said, his tone almost resigned. "Leave it with the doorman," I snapped before hanging up. I didn't want to see his face ever again. Lauren? She didn't even try to reach out. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. My dad, though, called me later that day, not to offer comfort, but to scold me for overreacting. Overreacting. That word rattled in my head like a loose screw. According to him, I was making things worse by walking away instead of fixing it like an adult. Fix it? With what? Duct tape and wishful thinking. I spent the next week crashing at my best friend Jenna's apartment. She was my lifeline through it all, feeding me wine and junk food while letting me vent endlessly about my family's betrayal. "They want me to come to dinner," I told her one night, holding my phone like it was a grenade. "You're not seriously considering it, are you?" she asked, eyebrows shooting up. "Of course not. But they're making me feel like I'm the bad guy," I admitted, hating how small and defeated I sounded. Jenna rolled her eyes, so hard I thought they might get stuck. "They're gaslighting you, plain and simple. Lauren and Mark are the villains here, not you. Don't let them twist this." Her words helped, but the guilt still gnawed at me. Every time I refused to answer their calls or texts, I felt like I was peeling away a piece of myself. Family was supposed to be everything, wasn't it? So why did it feel like mine was a weight dragging me down? The final straw came a week later when my stepmom sent me a text that read, "You'll understand one day. Love is complicated, but family is forever." I stared at the words, my blood boiling. She sounded like she was congratulating someone on surviving a bad breakup, not comforting her stepdaughter after one of the most humiliating betrayals imaginable. I replied with a single word, blocked. And I meant it. Blocking them wasn't the instant relief I'd hoped for, but it was the first step toward reclaiming some control. With their voices muted, I could finally think about what I wanted for the first time in years. I threw myself into work, using the long hours to distract from the ache in my chest. I even started looking for new jobs, ones far away from the small town where my family shadow loomed over everything. The universe must have heard my prayers because 2 months later, I got an offer from a marketing firm in London. It wasn't glamorous, a mid-level position with a salary that would barely cover rent, but it was enough. Enough to get me out, to put an ocean between me and the people who had let me down so completely. When I told Jenna, she squealed and immediately started planning my goodbye party. "This is exactly what you need," she said, squeezing my hand. "A clean slate. New city, new people, and no Mark or Lauren anywhere in sight." The night before I left, my dad made one last attempt to reach me. He left a voicemail, his tone softer than it had been in months. "Sweetheart, I just want to talk. You're still my daughter, and I'll always love you. But family's not something you can walk away from. Please think about coming home. We can work this out together." I didn't call him back. London was overwhelming at first. The city was loud, fast, and completely indifferent to my existence. For someone used to small-town life, it was a shock to the system. But it was exactly what I needed. There was no one to whisper about my broken engagement, no familiar faces to pity me. Here I was just another woman on the tube, clutching a coffee and rushing to work. The job was tough, too. My boss was a perfectionist who didn't tolerate mistakes, and my co-workers were nice but distant. I spent most evenings eating microwave dinners in my shoebox of a flat, wondering if I'd made a mistake. But slowly, things began to shift. I landed a big client 3 months in, a project that required long hours but earned me respect at the office. My boss even started nodding at me in the hallways, a sure sign I was doing something right. I made friends, too, other expats who understood what it felt like to start over. We bonded over late-night drinks and shared stories of the lives we'd left behind. Bit by bit, I felt like myself again. Not the broken, betrayed version of me who had driven away from that engagement party, but someone stronger, someone who had clawed her way back from the edge. Every so often, though, I'd get an email or a message from an unknown number, Lauren, Mark, or one of my parents trying to reconnect. I never responded. Let them sit in the silence they created. I'd given them more chances than they deserved, and now, finally, I was giving myself one. Starting over wasn't easy, but at least it was mine. London was everything I hoped it would be. Fast-paced, impersonal, and overflowing with opportunity. It was also harder than I imagined. My first flat was more like a glorified closet. The shower only ran cold water half the time, and I could hear my upstairs neighbor stomping around like he was training for a marathon. But I didn't care. It was mine, and more importantly, it was far away from the mess I left behind. Work at the marketing agency was intense from day one. My boss, Cheryl, was the kind of woman who could make a grown man cry with a single raised eyebrow. She didn't believe in hand-holding, and mistakes were met with icy glares and a single, devastating word: unacceptable. The pressure was suffocating at first, but I thrived on it. I poured myself into every project, staying late to perfect pitches, and running on little more than coffee and adrenaline. For months, my social life was non-existent. I didn't have the energy to make new friends or the money to go out. My evenings were spent in my flat, eating instant noodles and scrolling through job boards for something better. But then, something shifted. Cheryl handed me a campaign for a mid-tier beauty brand, a project no one else wanted because the client was notoriously difficult. "If you pull this off," Cheryl said, fixing me with one of her signature icy stares, "you're not just a team player. You're a leader. Don't let me regret this." I didn't. The campaign, which focused on inclusivity and authenticity, went viral within weeks of launching. Suddenly, our agency was fielding calls from bigger brands, and Cheryl began referring to me as her secret weapon. Promotions followed, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Meanwhile, Lauren and Mark's lives continued to play out on social media, like some bizarre reality show I couldn't stop watching. Their wedding was a spectacle. White doves, a champagne fountain, and a guest list that looked like it had been ripped from the pages of a society magazine. Lauren wore a designer gown that probably cost more than my entire year's rent, and her captions were dripping with smug satisfaction. "Found my forever love," she wrote under one photo of her and Mark gazing into each other's eyes. The comment section was a nauseating mix of heart emojis and gushing congratulations. But as much as Lauren seemed to be thriving, Mark was a different story. Even in the carefully curated photos, he looked off. His smile never quite reached his eyes, and there was a stiffness to his posture that made it seem like he was barely holding it together. About 6 months after the wedding, they announced the launch of their luxury wedding planning business. The photos showed them cutting the ribbon on an office that looked more like a boutique hotel: polished floors, velvet furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows. Their website was full of buzzwords like bespoke, timeless, and exclusive, promising clients the fairy tale weddings of their dreams. For a while, it seemed like they were killing it. Their Instagram was flooded with pictures of extravagant ceremonies they'd planned: sprawling vineyards, private estates, and even a castle. They threw themselves into the image of success, posting motivational quotes about chasing dreams and working as a power couple. But appearances are deceiving. The first crack in their facade came through a mutual friend, Amy, who still kept in touch with some of the people back home. Over drinks one evening, she casually mentioned that Lauren and Mark's business wasn't doing as well as their Instagram suggested. "They're bleeding money," Amy said, swirling her glass of wine. "Apparently, they spent a fortune on branding and advertising, but they're not getting enough clients to justify it." I raised an eyebrow. "So, all that glitz and glamour is just smoke and mirrors?" Amy nodded, leaning in conspiratorially. "Oh, absolutely. A friend of mine worked on one of their events and said they're constantly late on payments. Vendors are pissed, and there's even talk of lawsuits. Honestly, it's only a matter of time before the whole thing crashes." Hearing that was like biting into a piece of dark chocolate, bitter, but satisfying. I didn't wish them well, not after everything they'd done to me, but I hadn't actively wished them harm either. Still, the idea of their perfect little life unraveling brought me a grim sense of justice. Karma, I thought, might finally be doing its job. From then on, I couldn't resist keeping tabs on their downward spiral. Their posts became less frequent, the captions more defensive. "Building an empire takes sacrifice," Lauren wrote under a photo of her and Mark looking unusually serious in their office. The signs of strain were everywhere. Mark looked thinner, his jaw set tighter in every photo. Lauren's tone grew sharper, even in the comments where she used to gush over her forever love. One day, Amy sent me a link to a local news article.
"You're gonna love this," she said.
The headline read, "Local wedding planning business accused of fraud by vendors." My jaw dropped as I skimmed the piece. Vendors were claiming that Lauren and Mark owed them tens of thousands of dollars, and at least 2 couples had filed lawsuits over failure to deliver promised services. The article didn't mention their names directly. It referred to them as the co-owners, but the accompanying photo was unmistakably their office. "They're finished," Amy said with a smirk. I wanted to feel triumphant, but all I felt was a strange mix of pity and vindication. Lauren and Mark had built their empire on a foundation of lies and ego, and now it was crumbling. Still, a small part of me couldn't help but wonder if this was the end of their story, or just the beginning of another chapter that would somehow drag me back into their mess. I was curled up on the couch, listening to the rain tap against my windows, when I heard the knock. It was a slow, hesitant sound, not the kind of confident rapping you'd expect from a neighbor or a delivery person. Frowning, I set down my tea and padded to the door, pulling it open just enough to peer outside. There she was. Lauren. I barely recognized her at first. Her usual polish was gone. Her makeup was smeared, her hair clung to her face in damp strands, and her coat looked soaked through. For a moment, all I could do was gape at her. The last time I'd seen her was years ago, at that engagement party. My chest tightened at the memory, but before I could slam the door in her face, she spoke. "We need to talk," she said, her voice cracking. I almost laughed.
"Talk?"
After all this time? After everything she'd done? But there was something in her expression, desperation. Maybe that stopped me. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let her in. Lauren wasted no time. The second she was inside, she launched into a rambling monologue, pacing the length of my living room. "The business is failing," she began, wringing her hands. "Mark and I were in trouble. Big trouble." I folded my arms and leaned against the wall, keeping my face impassive. "And this has what to do with me?" She hesitated, glancing at me like she was trying to gauge how much sympathy she could squeeze out. "We're over $220,000 in debt," she said finally, her voice shaking. "We've tried everything, loans, refinancing, cutting costs, but nothing's working. The banks won't touch us anymore, and we can't ask Dad or Mom for anything. They're stretched thin." Her words hit me like a gust of cold wind. I knew things had been bad for them, but hearing the exact numbers put it into stark perspective. Still, I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. This was the same woman who had looked me in the eye on my engagement night and told me she'd found true love with my fiancé. And now she was here, standing in my living room, asking for help. "We need $80,000 to keep the business afloat," Lauren said, her tone almost pleading. "If we can just get through the next few months, we can turn things around. We'll pay you back, I swear." I blinked at her, incredulous. "And you came to me because—" Lauren bit her lip, glancing down at her hands. "You're the only one in the family who has that kind of money," she said quietly, like it was the most logical explanation in the world. I couldn't stop the laugh that escaped me. It wasn't a happy laugh, but a sharp, bitter sound that filled the room. "Let me get this straight," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You and Mark betray me, destroy my engagement, and cut me out of the family. And now you think I should bail you out?" "It's not like that," she said quickly, her eyes widening. "We're family." "Don't," I snapped, holding up a hand. "Don't you dare pull the family card with me. You lost the right to call me family the night you slept with my fiancé." Lauren flinched but didn't back down. "I know I made mistakes," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I hurt you. But this isn't just about me, it's about Mark, too. He's struggling. We both are. I'm asking you to look past the past and help us." The audacity of her plea made my blood boil. "You didn't just hurt me, Lauren. You blew up my entire life. And now you want me to forget all of that and hand over $80,000? She took a shaky breath, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, okay?"
"I'm so sorry."
"But you're being petty, holding on to this grudge after all these years. Can't you see this is bigger than that?" "Petties?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You think I'm being petty? For not wanting to help the woman who ruined my relationship and the man who helped her do it? You're unbelievable." Lauren's tears turned to anger, her face flushing red. "You don't understand how hard it's been for us," she snapped. "We've been fighting to keep everything together, and you what? You're just sitting here in your perfect little apartment, watching us struggle? I shook my head, my patience wearing thin. Get out, I said, my voice icy. What? She asked, stunned. I said, get out, I repeated, stepping toward the door. I've worked too hard to rebuild my life to let you drag me back into your mess. You made your choices, Lauren. Now live with them. Lauren hesitated, her face crumpling as fresh tears spilled over. For a moment, I thought she might say something else, but she just grabbed her coat and stumbled toward the door. As she stepped outside into the rain, she turned back to look at me one last time. You'll regret this, she said softly. I closed the door in her face. For a long time after she left, I stood there, staring at the closed door, my chest heaving with a mix of anger and disbelief. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part felt hollow. No matter how much distance I put between us, Lauren still had a way of getting under my skin. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the rain, her words echoed in my mind. You'll regret this. But the truth was I already had. I regretted ever letting her into my life in the first place. The morning after Lauren's visit, I was just starting to shake off the tension when my phone buzzed on the counter. I ignored it at first, sipping my coffee as I stared out the window at the gray London sky. But it buzzed again. And again. Finally, I picked it up, frowning when I saw my dad's name flashing on the screen. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. Hello, I answered cautiously. What the hell is wrong with you? He barked. No pleasantries. No concern. Just raw, unfiltered anger. Good morning to you too, I said dryly, already bracing myself. She's your sister, he said, as though that one word was supposed to excuse everything. Lauren came to you in a moment of need, and you slammed the door in her face. What kind of person does that? I clenched my jaw, gripping the edge of the counter. The kind of person who remembers what she did to me, I shot back. Did Lauren conveniently forget to mention that part? She's trying to make amends, he said sharply. But you're too selfish to see it. This grudge of yours, it's toxic. It's time to grow up and move past it. My laugh was bitter and humorless. Move past it? She slept with my fiancé, Dad, on the night of my engagement. And you expect me to just what? Pretend it never happened. His silence lasted just long enough to make my stomach twist, and then he doubled down. People make mistakes. Family forgives. No, Dad, I said, my voice trembling with rage. Family doesn't destroy each other. Family doesn't take sides with the person who betrayed you and then come begging for money years later. Before he could respond, I hung up. But the reprieve was short-lived because not even an hour later, my phone buzzed again, this time with a text from my stepmom. Family is about unity, not grudges. You're being selfish, holding on to this anger for so long. Lauren and Mark need your help, and you're the only one who can step up. I stared at the message, my fingers trembling as I typed a response. But before I could hit send, another text popped up. Rise above the past. Be the bigger person. You'll feel better about yourself if you help them. It was like she was reading from a script, and the condescension made my blood boil. I deleted my original response and typed a new one. They made their choices. Now they can live with them. I hit send, expecting that to be the end of it. But of course, it wasn't. My stepmom immediately fired back. You're cold-hearted. No wonder you can't keep a man. That one hit harder than I wanted to admit. I slammed my phone down on the counter, my chest heaving. The insult was low, even for her, but I refused to let it show. Over the next few days, the guilt-tripping escalated. My dad sent long-winded texts about the importance of family, peppered with memories of my childhood, the time he taught me to ride a bike, the birthday party where he dressed up as a clown, the night he stayed up helping me with a school project. As if those moments erased the years of emotional neglect or the way he'd sided with Lauren and Mark when it mattered most. Lauren's silence, on the other hand, was deafening. I half expected her to show up at my door again, but she didn't. Instead, she let Dad and my stepmom do the dirty work for her, feeding them just enough sob stories to keep the pressure on me. I tried to stay strong, but the constant barrage was exhausting. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a wave of anxiety, wondering what fresh manipulation awaited me. Even my half-sister Emily, who had always stayed out of the drama, chimed in with a carefully worded email. Look, I know things have been hard between you and Lauren, she wrote, but she's in a really bad place right now. We all are. I'm not saying you have to forgive her, but maybe helping her would help you both move forward. I didn't respond. What was there to say? No one seemed to understand that helping Lauren wouldn't bring me peace. It would only drag me back into the toxicity I'd fought so hard to escape. The breaking point came 3 days later when I received yet another message from my stepmom. "We've tried being nice, but your behavior is unacceptable. Lauren and Mark deserve a chance to fix their lives, and you're refusing to help out of spite. Don't you think it's time to grow up and act like a real adult?" I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with rage. For years, I'd swallowed their insults, their dismissals, their favoritism toward Lauren. But this was too much. I opened a group chat with my dad, stepmom, and Emily. My fingers flew across the screen as I typed. "You made your choice when you sided with Lauren and Mark. I made mine when I walked away. Don't contact me again." I hit send and immediately blocked them all. The relief was immediate, like a weight lifting off my chest. But the hurt lingered, a dull ache that refused to fade. Cutting off family isn't as easy as people think. It's like severing a part of yourself, knowing it'll never grow back. I spent the rest of the night curled up on the couch, replaying the confrontation in my mind. Part of me wanted to feel stronger, but mostly, I just felt tired. Exhausted by the endless drama, the manipulation, the guilt. As I drifted off to sleep, I told myself I'd done the right thing. But the question lingered. Why didn't it feel like enough? It was a regular Tuesday morning, one of those uneventful days where the routine of emails, meetings, and coffee refills hummed along without disruption. My assistant buzzed me just before lunch, her voice tinged with hesitation.
"There's someone here to see you," she said.
"Do they have an appointment?" I asked, barely looking up from my laptop. "No, but," she trailed off, clearly unsure how to proceed. "He says it's personal. His name is Mark." My stomach dropped. For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. Then anger bubbled to the surface, sharp and hot. "Send him away," I said curtly. But before she could, Mark had already walked past her desk. He stood in the doorway, looking out of place in my sleek, modern office. His suit hung awkwardly on his thinner frame, and his face was pale and drawn, with dark circles under his eyes. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. The security guard was hovering in the hall, waiting for my signal. I should have told him to escort Mark out. I should have let him stand there and stew in the consequences of his actions. But against my better judgment, I nodded. 5 minutes, I said coldly, waving off the guard. Mark sat stiffly across from me, his hands clasped tightly as though holding himself together. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I let the silence stretch, waiting for him to break it. "You look good," he said finally, his voice tentative. "Don't," I snapped. "Get to the point." He flinched but nodded. "Things are bad," he admitted, leaning forward. "Worse than I'm sure Lauren told you. We're not just in debt. We're being sued by multiple vendors, caterers, florists, even venues. They're all claiming unpaid bills." I folded my arms, refusing to soften. "And whose fault is that?" His face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and frustration. "I know we made mistakes," he said. "Lauren, she got carried away. Maxed out all our credit cards trying to keep up appearances. I told her we couldn't afford it, but she wouldn't listen. There it was, the same pathetic passivity that had let him betray me all those years ago." I stared at him, unmoved. "She's not the only one responsible," he added quickly, sensing my lack of sympathy. "I'm just as much to blame. I should have done more to stop it. But now we're trapped. The lawsuits alone could ruin us, and we don't have anywhere else to turn." I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "So you thought what? That I'd swoop in and save the day?" He hesitated, his fingers gripping the edge of his chair. "Lauren told me she asked you for help. I wanted to come myself because it's not just for her. It's for me too." That did it. The thin thread of patience I'd been clinging to snapped. I stood abruptly, glaring down at him. "You had no problem betraying me for Lauren," I said, my voice icy and controlled. "You didn't think twice about what that would do to me. And now you want me to save you? Both of you?" His face crumpled. "It wasn't like that." "Spare me," I interrupted, my voice rising. "I don't care about your excuses. You made your choices, Mark. You chose her. You chose this. Now you can live with it." He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. "Get out of my office. And don't come back." Mark lingered for a moment, as if hoping I'd change my mind. When it became clear I wouldn't, he rose unsteadily to his feet and left without another word. As the door clicked shut behind him, I exhaled sharply, my hands trembling slightly. I'd thought seeing him again would feel satisfying, like reclaiming some kind of power. And in a way, it did. But it also left me shaken. Mark had always been so polished, so confident. Seeing him reduced to this, a desperate, broken man, was unsettling. It reminded me of just how far I'd come since that night, how much power I'd clawed back from the people who had tried to strip it away. Still, the encounter stayed with me for the rest of the day, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. Because even though I'd told him to leave, even though I'd stood my ground, there was a tiny, treacherous part of me that felt something dangerously close to pity. But pity wasn't enough to erase the past. And it sure as hell wasn't enough to make me forget what they'd done. The call started 2 days after Mark's visit. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize, but something about it made my stomach twist. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello? Do you have any idea what you've done?" My father's voice barked on the other end, sharp and furious. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Hello to you too, Dad." "Don't start with the sarcasm," he snapped. "I just got off the phone with Lauren. She told me everything. Do you honestly think it's okay to leave your sister and her husband to suffer like this?" "Suffer?" I said, incredulous. "Dad, they brought this on themselves. You know that." "She's your sister," he shouted, as if that word still carried some magical weight with me. "She made mistakes, sure, but family is supposed to help each other. You've got the money. What's the big deal?" I laughed bitterly. "The big deal is that she betrayed me, Dad. She didn't just make mistakes. She destroyed my engagement and humiliated me in front of everyone I cared about. And you," my voice cracked, and I took a deep breath to steady it. "You stood by and let it happen. That was years ago," he said dismissively. "You need to let it go. Stop punishing her for something she regrets." "She doesn't regret it," I shot back. "She regrets getting caught. There's a difference." After I hung up, I expected some breathing room. Instead, the pressure ramped up. My stepmother started leaving voicemails, her tone sugary and condescending. "Hi, sweetheart. I know you're upset, but you can't let anger cloud your judgment. Family is more important than grudges. Helping Lauren and Mark is the right thing to do, and deep down I know you'll come around." Another voicemail came the next day. "I don't understand how you can be so cruel. Your father and I raised you better than this. Lauren is hurting, and she needs you. Be the bigger person, honey. You'll feel so much better if you do." The manipulation was almost impressive. Almost. When they realized the guilt wasn't working, they turned to public shaming. Friends from back home started sending me screenshots of my dad and stepmom's Facebook posts. "It's heartbreaking when your own child turns their back on family," one post read. Another, "We've always believed in helping each other during hard times, but not everyone shares that belief, unfortunately." They didn't name me outright, but everyone knew who they were talking about. The comments were a mix of support and thinly veiled judgment. People I hadn't spoken to in years chimed in with things like, "She'll regret this one day," or "Some people forget where they came from." But the worst was when my half-sister, Emily, reached out. She'd always stayed neutral during the fallout, refusing to take sides. I appreciated her for that, or at least I had. "I know this isn't my business," her message began, which was always code for "I'm about to make it my business." She went on to explain that Lauren and Mark were in a really bad place and that everyone was worried about them. "They just need a little help to get back on their feet," Emily wrote. "I'm not saying you have to forgive them, but maybe this could be the first step toward moving forward. For all of us." I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. Emily was the last person I wanted to fight with, but I couldn't let this slide. "If you want to help them so badly," I replied, "why don't you give them the money?" Her response was almost instant. "I wish I could, but I don't have that kind of money." "Neither do I," I typed back, even though it was a lie. I didn't know her, or anyone else, the truth. The pressure was relentless. Every call, every message, every passive-aggressive Facebook post chipped away at my resolve. I knew I'd done the right thing, but that didn't make it easier. Cutting ties with toxic people sounds empowering on paper, but in reality, it feels like ripping off a bandage that never fully heals. The worst part was the isolation. No matter how many friends I surrounded myself with or how much success I achieved, there was a little part of me, a stubborn, stupid part, that still wanted my dad to care about me again. I wanted him to call me just to check in, not to berate me. I wanted him to tell me he was proud of the life I'd built, not to guilt me into saving Lauren from her own mess. But deep down, I knew that was a fantasy. My dad had made his choice years ago, and I'd made mine. Still, late at night, when the silence in my flat felt deafening, I wondered if I'd ever stop feeling like the villain in their story. I hadn't thought about my mother's estate in years. After her death, the legalities were handled by my father and stepmom. At the time, I was too young and too devastated to care about the details. All I knew was that my mom had left me a modest inheritance, a nest egg that was meant to help me get started in life. It wasn't until a casual conversation with my lawyer friend, Claire, that the subject came up again. We were having dinner, and I was venting about the latest wave of guilt-tripping for my family. "You've been through the ringer with them," Claire said, shaking her head. "You're sure there's no financial connection left? No loose ends they can use against you?" I frowned. "No, I don't think so. My mom's estate was settled ages ago. It's not like they had access to it." Claire gave me a sharp look. "Are you sure about that? Because if your name was tied to anything jointly with your dad, there's a chance he could have dipped into it." Her words sent a chill down my spine. It had never occurred to me to question the handling of my mother's estate. My father had always insisted everything was taken care of, and I'd been too trusting, or naive, to dig deeper. "Can you check for me?" I asked hesitantly. Claire nodded. "Send me the paperwork you have, and I'll look into it." A week later, Claire called me, her tone unusually serious. "You were right to be suspicious," she said. "I went through the records. Your father and stepmother have been siphoning money from your mother's estate for years." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Over $50,000, she said grimly. "They've labeled it as loans, but there's no documentation showing any repayment. Frankly, it looks like they never intended to pay it back." I sat there, stunned. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Lauren or Mark had done. This wasn't just a mistake or a lapse in judgment. This was calculated theft, and it came from the people who were supposed to protect me. I confronted my dad the next day. I called him, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "I know about the estate," I said without preamble. "I know you and Lisa took $50,000. Care to explain?" There was a long pause before he sighed heavily. "We needed it," he said flatly. "Needed it," I repeated, my voice rising. "For what? To bankroll Lauren's messes? To keep up your lifestyle? That money wasn't yours to take." "Don't be dramatic," he snapped. "We always intended to pay it back. But you didn't," I shot back. "And let's be honest, you never would have. You saw that money as yours to use, because you don't see me as a person, do you? To you, I'm just a convenient piggy bank." "Don't you dare speak to me like that," he growled. "We raised you, provided for you. You owe us some gratitude." "Gratitude?" I laughed bitterly. "You think stealing from your dead wife's estate and lying to your daughter earns you gratitude? You're unbelievable." "You have more than enough now," he said dismissively. "What's the big deal? You're doing fine." The call ended with him hanging up on me, but the damage was already done. Any lingering hope I'd had of salvaging our relationship was gone. In that moment, I realized the truth. I was never a daughter to him. I was a resource, a means to an end. I didn't hesitate to file a legal claim to recover the money. Claire handled the paperwork, and while the process was tedious, it felt empowering. For once, I was standing up for myself, not just against Lauren or Mark, but against the entire toxic family dynamic that had been suffocating me for years. When my dad found out, he called me in a rage. "You're heartless," he spat. "You drag your own father to court over a measly $50,000? "It's not about the money," I said calmly, though my hands were shaking. "It's about the principle. You stole from me, Dad. From Mom's legacy. And you don't even feel bad about it. You've changed," he said bitterly. "London's turned you into someone I don't even recognize." "Good," I said, my voice steely. "I'd rather be unrecognizable than the doormat you raised me to be." He hung up again, but this time I felt no sadness, no regret. If standing up for myself made me the villain in their story, then so be it. The legal process dragged on for months, but I didn't back down. The money wasn't the point. It was about drawing a line in the sand, about proving to myself that I wasn't going to let them take anything else from me. When the court finally ruled in my favor, Claire and I celebrated over champagne. The funds were returned to my account, but the victory was bittersweet. It solidified what I'd already known. There was no going back. My family had chosen their side, and I had chosen mine. That night, as I looked over the paperwork one last time, a strange sense of closure washed over me. They'd taken so much from me, my trust, my peace of mind, my sense of belonging, but they wouldn't take anything else. Not anymore. If they wanted to paint me as the villain, fine. I'd wear the title with pride. It started with a text from Amy, one of the few mutual friends I'd stayed in touch with over the years. "Have you heard about Lauren and Mark?" I stare at the message, debating whether to respond. Curiosity got the better of me.
No. What now?
The reply came quickly. "They've filed for bankruptcy. Lost everything. House, business, all gone. They're living with your dad and stepmom now." I sat back, my thoughts spinning. I should have felt triumphant. This was karma, wasn't it? The poetic justice I'd secretly hoped for. They'd clawed their way to the top, stepping on me to get there, and now they'd crashed back down. But instead of satisfaction, all I felt was exhaustion. The details trickled in over the next few days. The business, which had once been Lauren's pride and joy, had completely imploded. Vendors who hadn't been paid for months finally took legal action, and the lawsuits piled up faster than they could handle. Clients demanded refunds for weddings that had been botched or canceled altogether. Social media turned on them, with scathing reviews calling them frauds. Mark, it seemed, had tried to salvage things by taking out more loans, but it only dug them deeper into the hole. When the foreclosure notice came, they had no choice but to move back in with my dad and stepmom. Amy sent me a screenshot of Lauren's last Instagram post. The caption was a rambling mix of self-pity and denial. "Sometimes life throws challenges your way to test your strength. We'll rise from this stronger than ever. Hashtag keep fighting, hashtag family first." The comments, once filled with heart emojis and supportive friends, were now a battlefield of thinly veiled criticism. "Maybe try paying people next time," one read. Another simply said, "Karma." The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd all chosen each other over me. Lauren, Mark, my dad, and stepmom. They'd formed a united front, one that excluded me entirely. And now, they were stuck together, sinking under the weight of their own bad decisions. At first, I avoided thinking about it too much. I told myself it wasn't my problem, that I'd already wasted too much of my life dealing with their drama. But the truth is, no matter how far I ran, they always had a way of pulling me back in. Even from a distance, their mess haunted me. I caught myself imagining the scene at my dad's house, Lauren pacing the living room, complaining about how unfair the world was, Mark quietly sulking in a corner, guilt etched into his face, my stepmom trying to keep the peace, while my dad muttered about how ungrateful I was. It was almost laughable, how predictable they were. But instead of feeling smug, I just felt tired. For a brief moment, I considered reaching out. Not to help, I was done with that, but just to see if there was anything left to salvage. Maybe this was the wake-up call they needed. Maybe they'd finally understand how much they'd hurt me. But every time I thought about it, I remembered Lauren's smug face on my engagement night, the way she'd casually dismissed my pain like it was an inconvenience. I remember my dad's tone when he told me to calm down and think about the bigger picture. I remembered the silence that followed, the years of being ignored unless they needed something from me. Some wounds cut too deep to heal. Instead of reaching out, I buried myself in work. My career was thriving, and I poured every ounce of energy into building the life I'd fought so hard to create. But the news of their downfall lingered in the back of my mind, a constant, nagging presence. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I caught myself scrolling through old photos, pictures of family gatherings from years ago, back when things were simpler, back when I still believed in the idea of family. There was one photo of me and Lauren as kids, grinning from ear to ear as we built a sandcastle on the beach. Looking at it now, I barely recognized the girl in the picture. I wondered if Lauren ever looked back on those days and felt the same sense of loss. But then I remembered the choices she'd made, the way she'd shattered our relationship without a second thought. And I knew the answer. Some bridges weren't meant to be rebuilt. Months later, Amy texted me again with an update. "Lauren and Mark are still living with your parents. Apparently, it's not going well. Constant fights. Your dad's fed up, but they have nowhere else to go." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The London skyline sparkles through my window as I sit curled up on the couch, a cup of tea cooling in my hands. From this height, the city looks peaceful, almost serene, but I know better. Just like me, it hides its scars beneath the surface, humming with stories of survival, reinvention, and loss. I've come so far from the woman I was when I left home. Back then, I was raw and broken, dragging the pieces of my life behind me as I fled the wreckage. Now, I've built something new, something that's mine. My career is thriving, my flat is small but cozy, and I've made friends who feel more like family than my actual family ever did. But the quiet moments, like now, are the hardest. There's no chaos to distract me, no phone buzzing with guilt-laden messages, no crisis demanding my attention. It's just me, the stillness, and the gnawing question I can't quite answer. Did I do the right thing? I don't regret cutting ties. I know that. It was a matter of survival, a necessary step to protect myself from the toxic patterns that had drained me for years. But knowing I made the right choice doesn't make it hurt any less. Family is supposed to be your safe place, the people who stand by you no matter what. But my family betrayed me in the worst way, and instead of offering support, they doubled down on their betrayal, choosing Lauren and Mark over me at every turn. I tell myself I'm better off without them, and most days I believe it. But some nights, the ache of what I've lost creeps in. It's not just about Lauren or Mark, it's about the childhood memories, the shared laughter, the sense of belonging I used to feel before everything went wrong. They've stopped contacting me for now. After months of relentless guilt-tripping, public shaming, and manipulative pleas for money, the silence is both a relief and a weight. I know them well enough to realize it won't last. The next time they hit rock bottom, and there will be a next time they'll come crawling back. Maybe it'll be Lauren, her crocodile tears in full effect, claiming she's changed and just needs one more chance. Or maybe it'll be my dad, delivering another lecture about family unity and trying to guilt me into bailing them out. And when that day comes, I'll have to decide all over again. Do I stick to my boundaries, keep the walls I've built around my life intact? Or do I let them back in, risking everything I've worked so hard to rebuild? The truth is, I don't know. Some days, I feel strong enough to hold my ground, to keep them at arm's length no matter how hard they push. Other days, the little girl inside me just wants her dad to call her sweetheart, without an ulterior motive. What I do know is this. Loyalty has to go both ways, and they never gave me that. They expected me to be the dutiful daughter, the forgiving sister, the endless well of support they could draw from whenever it suited them. But when I needed them, they weren't there. Maybe I'll forgive them someday. Maybe time will soften the edges of my anger, and I'll find a way to let go of the hurt. Or maybe I won't. Maybe the damage is too deep, the wounds too raw to ever fully heal. For now, all I can do is focus on the life I've built for myself. It's not perfect, and it's lonelier than I'd like, but it's mine. It's a life free from their chaos, their betrayals, their endless demands.